afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Martin.
And I'm John Martin.
And we are the founders of Young Black Leadership Alliance. YBLA is a nonprofit organization that focuses on building leaders in young Black men and women starting in high school, through college, and into their young professional careers. Our program is based on 3 pillars. It's leadership development, community service, and college and career readiness. Our mission is to build leaders that will make a positive impact on their peers, in the communities, and eventually the world.
We want to first thank our partners at DHG for starting the charge on this initiative to end racial injustice and inequality in the Black community. We thank their team for all the support they're making to help make this a reality.
Yes.
If this is your first segment joining us, the YBLA Community Conversation Initiative is about taking a stand against racial inequality and injustice. We're using the acronym STAND to describe this initiative. STAND is for seize the moment, talk to others, act on your biases, no more silence, and donate your resources. We invite you to stand with us to make a better tomorrow in the Charlotte community. We have a targeted goal of 2020 actions towards bridging the gap of racial disparities.
Yes, so welcome everyone to our 10th segment of YBLA Community Conversations. Today marks the 4th session of phase 2 as we take a deeper dive into the racial disparities that has plagued the Black community. Today we will discuss the education disparity among Blacks. So far we have discussed employment, housing, and criminal justice disparities. Even though we've always felt that we were scraping the surface on these deeply rooted issues, we believe that a lot of learning and positive actions have come from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the employment segment, we learned about positive actions companies are taking, such as creating safe spaces in the workplace to talk about race, being more intentional about hiring diversity at all levels, and making major investments to combat economic and racial inequalities.
Right. And in the housing segment, we learned how organizations are building mixed-use housing to tackle the housing crisis in Charlotte. Finance companies are working to remove the biases of loan application approvals, and additional funds are being allocated for affordable housing by the city, corporations, and even taxpayers.
Wow. So in the last segment on criminal justice, we learned that police officers are receiving more than 40 hours of training. There are programs such as I Speak Now and the Reach Academy that are educating youth on the criminal justice system. These programs are also teaching life skills, hosting job fairs, and even providing clothing to go on interviews. We learned ways that they are supporting positive change in our communities by getting educated, staying engaged, being an active neighbor, and of course, above all else, voting.
Exactly. So as we stated earlier, our target goal is to have 2020 actions towards bridging the gap of racial disparities. On the last call to action was send a letter of concern to the Charlotte City Council members. And thank you to all the ones that participated in sending letters. To give a quick update on our progress towards the 2020 actions, we're going to have our leader, Abuna, give us a report.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abuna Uche, and we are currently at 1,104 actions.
All right.
All right.
This means we are 55% towards our 2020 action goals.
Nice,
All
nice.
right, we're getting there.
Thank you, Abuna. Well, thank you for that report, and thank you, everybody, for helping us get to 55%. So we're halfway there. Come on, everybody, we're halfway there.
That's right.
So as you can see, Tammy and I are wearing the
Y'all
next
see
call
it?
to action.
Here it is.
All right. So after the panel discussion,
Yeah.
we will show you how to get your very own
YBLA Stand t-shirt.
And this will help support young Black leaders of YBLA. So please stay tuned.
Yeah, that's right. So today, let's get right to it. We're going to be talking about the racial disparity in education. So this is the primary disparity that we mostly see with our students in YBLA.
Absolutely.
So before I let the panel introduce themselves, we want to share a few statistics with you to kind of set the context of the conversation today.
All right, so as you will see on the slide on your screen, Charlotte-Mecklenburg by far is the most racially segregated district in North Carolina.
Yeah.
CMS would need to reassign 55% of its students in order to achieve racial parity across its schools.
Right. As you see in the next stat with CMS, High poverty schools are 90% Black and Hispanic and only 3% white, while low poverty schools are made up of 54% white and 34% Black and Hispanic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Switching subjects. So Blacks are overrepresented in the lowest paying fields and underrepresented in the highest paying fields. As a matter of fact, Blacks represent 5% of the higher paying STEM fields.
Right.
Wow.
And the last one here is nearly 80% of Black students borrow to pay for college and take on debt loads that are 15% higher than the average student.
Wow.
And this is one of the things that we are definitely working on in YBLA with our students to eliminate as much college loan debt as possible.
Absolutely.
So in summary, you will see that Blacks are attending high poverty schools. They are underrepresented in higher paying fields, and they are paying higher college loan debt than the average student. So now that we have had some basic information on the education disparity, let's hear from our panelists. I will start with one of our favorite teachers of CMS, Mr. Reddick. We want you to introduce yourself, your role, how long you have been in education, and give us one thing that you have learned from the COVID pandemic about racial disparities in education. So
absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Always great to be working with YBLA and especially looking at this distinguished panel right here. I'm feeling some sort of kind of way, but I appreciate it. I'm a middle school teacher here in CMS. I have been teaching middle school for 27 years in CMS. And unfortunately, I would say that the virus has not really taught me a lot. It's just kind of amplified what we've already known, which is just that there's disparities when it comes to technology access, educational preparedness, food needs of families. I actually can only speak from my school, and my school is fantastic and kind of in a bubble, but I was probably more caught off guard with the needs of the Hispanic population, my students, than I was anybody else. But most of it is just showing me the disparities that we already knew.
Yeah, wow. I will move on up to you, Ann. Can you introduce yourself? And Ann is one of our board members, so we're proud to have her on the panel today.
Well, I was going to say I'm a proud YBLA board member and hugely supportive of the STAND series and the work that Tammy and John and our youth do on behalf of our community's response. What I would say, and I would agree with Ronnie, that COVID has simply amplified or put a brighter spotlight on disparities that I've seen districts dealing with for many decades. And so I think it really probably has positioned us to be more action-oriented than perhaps we have been as a public education system historically. And I'm seeing districts begin to think about policy changes and the way we do business in public education across the country as there's a need to change.
Right. And how many years have you been in education?
I've been in public education for 35 years as a part of a public school system, and for the last 3 have been working with school superintendents and school districts across the country supporting their work.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, Mr. Chance, you introduce yourself.
Well, John and Tammy, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Chance Lewis by sake of role. I am a professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where I lead our urban education PhD program. I have been in education remarkably for 25 years. I started at 20 years old as a high school teacher and now a professor as well. In response to the COVID question, I agree with Ronnie that we known many of these disparities, but one thing COVID has done is shined an enhanced spotlight, particularly on the digital divide in the country, particularly with students who don't have access to technology, whether it be computers or even hotspots and internet access. And I think that has definitely raised an alarm in communities because many people didn't know the access was that real. And school districts around the country are still seeing students who have not engaged since the pandemic started. And that's a testament to those disparities as well.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Mr. Robert? You introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. Robert Mohammed, Director of Financial Aid at Howard University by way of Director at Winston State University most recently. Been in higher ed my entire career, and it's been 31 years now. So I've run the gamut from admissions to TRIO program, Upward Bound, to financial aid, veteran affairs, even some technology along the way. And which brings me to the most glaring area is the digital divide and having to have a contingency in place to assist our students. About 33% of all of our students don't have access to either internet access is stable, nor do they have access to proper computers. And some only use their phone in order to engage or be engaged by anyone. And then you add to that the transit nature of some of our students, having to move from place to place, not having everything they need in order to be successful. And it's really demonstrated the digital divide is much broader than maybe we thought it was. And it also then gets to the need to have some good contingencies in place, such as mobile hotspots, such as places students can go and get access as needed to be able to be prepared for whatever they're trying to accomplish, be it from a high school or college or just being generally engaged educationally.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, Robert. So when you were talking about like the 32% don't have access to computers, technology, and that, are you talking about that from a high school level or a collegiate level?
Yeah.
It follows the student. I think one of our challenges is we assume if a student comes to us, he or she overcomes their challenges. If they were homeless as a high school student, homelessness follows that student.
Mm-hmm.
If they needed technology, that need is going to persist. And unfortunately, we found that when students come to us, oftentimes we don't know how to engage them to find out what their needs are, or we make assumptions about them because of the way they present themselves and may be too proud to ask for assistance. So everything that we experience at the high school level, even food insecurities, follow students into college.
Wow.
That's interesting. Yeah, so Tammy and I were having a conversation before this about just that very point, and kind of our assumption, which I'm sure a lot of other people's assumption is like, hey, when they get to college,
the campus is going to take care of it. They should have access to computers. If they don't have one, you can go to the library, you got Wi-Fi. So
that was our assumption, but you were even turning that around.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, Mr. Frank, we'll let you chime on in here, introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. My name is Frank Barnes. I serve here in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools as our Chief Equity and Accountability Officer. I've been serving here a little bit over 8 years and have been in education for now 26 years.
Wow.
I think the thing that I've seen is twofold, building on what other panelists have already spoken to. One is COVID has really broadened my definition of the digital divide, if you will, and introduced me to a term of digital inclusion. And I think prior to this event, I would have thought about devices, I would have thought about connectivity, but it's the third leg of this stool, digital literacy, that also is critically important. That once you get access to the core tools, the device and the connectivity, how do you navigate the platforms that allow you access to the resources you need? That's a third stool that I didn't really attend to as much. I think secondly, and this is also building on what my colleagues have already said, is the importance and significance of public institutions and systems to help bridge the divide that individual families and actors can't do by themselves. I've never seen a time where public institutions can play a role to bridge the divide between sustenance and poverty, between access and complete isolation, like we see in these times, where families are having to make a choice between their public health and the education of their children. Wow. And I think that's what's been magnified for me, that although sometimes our institutions and systems haven't always lived up to the promise that they can provide, absent us, if we don't live up to that, families left to their own devices in some instances just aren't going to have all that they need to help their children to thrive and grow and meet their deep potential.
Awesome. Wow. Awesome. Thank you. Just real quick before I ask a question, we want to definitely make sure that the audience gets engaged in this as well. So if you guys would do us a couple of quick favors in the audience, hey, throw in there in the chat where you're from. So we would love to hear that. And then if you have questions, please put that in there as well. I'm going to jump into kind of that first question that we had, and I'm going to read the kind of the lead-in part, and then Frank, I'm going to ask you to answer this question first. So one of the education disparities that African-American students who go to high poverty schools, and I think really all African-American students, they lack access to rigorous college preparation courses, experienced teachers, school counselors, and then other support in their schools. So as a result of this, they're far less likely to be college ready. So what is our local school district doing? And then what are other states doing to combat this issue?
Sure, thank you. It's multifaceted. Allow me to talk about two particular things that we're doing here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. On the one hand, what we're working to do is to make sure that there's a strong instructional diet that's available to every student in every classroom, no matter what school they go into. What the research shows and what field knowledge affirms is that if students can have access to high quality instruction, standards aligned curriculum, that they can close the gap between the grade level and where they might be, no matter how far from standard or far beyond standard they are. They all benefit, but particularly students who are below standard or multiple grade levels behind benefit disproportionately. They benefit the most. So working to make sure that there's necessary tools, systems, processes, and skills and disposition in our teachers and the tools that they need can provide that. The other aspect of that is recognizing that we have an array of advanced courses that students can take starting as early as the middle grades, but mostly in their high school years. International Baccalaureate, Advanced Placement, Cambridge, even a dual enrollment where students can enroll in CMS for free while they also enroll in a college course for free, a dual enrollment. And what we're recognizing is we need to identify students earlier that who are ready for that kind of challenge and broaden the definitions beyond just a test score, but being able to identify them earlier and diversify the ways that they're identified. To actually have not just say a push in and a pull in approach, not just hope that they find out. What we're finding is that there are a lot of students that have great potential who might be in a high poverty school, who might be low income themselves, and no one has told them directly and specifically, you are gifted, you are talented, you can do much more than you've been pushing yourself or what maybe the school you're at has demanded of you. To identify those students and to use trusted adults, the ones that they said are trusted, surveying them, asking which adult in your school do you trust, pulling them into those courses and creating options where they have to opt out of those courses as opposed to opt in. We also are trying to make sure that those are open enrollment opportunities where students don't have to have where there's a kind of a gateway that says this isn't for you, because there's some students, because of no fault of their own, who haven't yet performed at a level that might say that they can be successful. But with enough support, enough time, and enough effort, they can be successful. So opening those doors and creating open enrollment in those options. And then third, trying to work with teachers to build up their skills and say, how can you allow in more students without watering down your curriculum or lowering the standard? Because that will not serve them well for the world that awaits them. And also working on the dispositions and the cultural proficiency of our teachers, so that as they're dealing with the diversity that walks in their classrooms, they can meet students where they are, acknowledge the cultural assets they bring, and help them to meet the 21st century demands that they address them in the classroom in the world.
Awesome, awesome. And what are you seeing on the national level?
Much of what Frank has talked about that's happening here locally, I also see happening in states across the country. One thing in particular that I would want to highlight from what Frank said is an increased focus at the state level about the high quality instructional materials that students have access to, which seems like a simple thing, but I think it is an opportunity and can be a key lever for a state and a school district to think about in terms of overall school performance, as well as the individual student performance that's reflected in the district's success. The other thing is a focus on, once you have those high quality instructional materials in place, that are evidence-based and have a proven record of success with students. The real key to that success is teachers like Ronnie in every classroom in public schools across our country. And so it is both what we're teaching kids and that being high quality, but it's also who's teaching students and who's leading the schools. So thinking about placing our best leaders and our best teachers in schools where the students have the greatest gains to make. And I'm seeing districts and states make some strategic moves in that direction around placement of talent after they've focused on the quality of the instructional materials.
That's interesting.
Very good point.
John, can I add something to that real quick?
Please.
So something that I definitely think is well needed and I know works is also would love to see more minority educators in schools. My experience of teaching, having minority educators in schools help shine spotlights within the school on implicit biases that are taking place within the school. So we have an amazing organization here in Charlotte called Profound Gentlemen that is addressing the issue, the fact that only 2% of teachers in the United States are African-American males. And so they're doing a great job with advocating and getting more minorities in the classroom. And just as an example, we have an outstanding teacher in my school, Mr. James O'Neill, who, since he has shown up, he's crunched the data. He looks at the number of minority students that have been placed and males that have been placed in higher level math courses. He's addressing the issue. He's shining a spotlight on it so that others are seeing things that they did not know or think were a problem. But when we pack schools with white teachers and they honestly think that they're doing the right thing, there's a lot of blind spots that we have that bringing minority teachers into the educational community really helps out.
Thanks, Ron. That's really great. Robert, from your side, how does the quality of a high school impact college admissions?
Well, it has great impact. We sometimes think that an A in Forsyth County or Union County is an A equivalent to an A in Mecklenburg County. We also think that there's the same equivalency when we look at schools that may be similar, but all of those different grades may have different types of input, how they determine depending upon the school district and depending upon the school. But we also know, unfortunately, that sometimes teachers are encouraged not to necessarily grade as necessary in order to meet certain standards. So with all that being considered, when a student comes to us, he or she may appear to be academically ready, but it may have academic challenges. And if you add to that the remedial coursework that we normally would have had opportunities for without question, some schools are not necessarily putting the access or the opportunity for access to remedial coursework into colleges because they have to pay for it themselves out of their budgets. It's not necessarily being funded by some other source or by the federal government, whatever the case may be. All those things impact that student's college readiness, and even though, again, they may be admissible, are they ready to perform at that level? And I'll give you an example. Some years ago at UNC Charlotte, where I did work at one point, we had issues where we had these qualified young men coming to college, but they were not necessarily getting the type of support they needed, even at the college level. There was some behaviors going on in the classroom that seemed to be biased at best, or perhaps bigoted or racist as well. And this was in the area of STEM. So our response as a university was to build a program called Building Better Brothers. My wife and I developed it at UNC Charlotte. It came out of a minority academic services, I believe it was at that time. And so we built this particular institution or this vehicle so students have a voice, not just in the classroom, but with administrators or with anybody on campus that was showing interest in helping those students become successful. And we realized some of the disparities in place because at that point in time, we had just gone through this conversation about blind admissions. And we recognized even at our admissions office at UNC Charlotte that admissions still was not necessarily blind, that there were decisions being made on someone's name or zip code. There are all kind of ways to have indications of where a student may come from or who they may be as you make your decisions. And we began to see, as decisions were made, that you had fewer and fewer African American males specifically coming to higher education or being admitted to UNC Charlotte.
Yeah, Chance, give me your thoughts on this. I mean, this is playing right into your space.
Yeah, 'cause it's right there.
So give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, great discussion. And to add to this, you know, if you put the pieces of the puzzle together, we're glad to see increased access to high-level programs to get students ready. But Frank noted one thing that I want to make sure that we don't miss. In low poverty schools, you have students starting in middle school having courses that get them on the pathway to college. And so as we start to look at that and they matriculate through the educational pipeline through high school, you know, one thing that is important is that all schools are not created equal, where it's not the same access to honors courses, not the same access to courses, you know, the IB programs that Frank mentioned. And then so as a result, then when they get in their file in front of Robert and he looks at their academic credentials, you know, it's not an even playing field, because an A, you know, in a regular course is not the same as an A in an AP course, right? So as you start to look at that, this is how the disparities start to follow the student. And one of the things that I write about in the work that I do is that, you know, we would think in public education that if a student graduates, they would be admissible, you know, from a public K through 12 system to the public college of their choice, just say within the same state. But I write about instances where students have been valedictorians and not even been admissible to public colleges and universities across the country, because they may not have had the right type of math credits or the right type of science credits. And so as you start to look at this, it puts students at a disadvantage, and then they have to find other means to get access to the courses, or what Robert mentioned, once they get to the university, now have to take remedial courses, which then adds to their college debt with no progress towards degree as well. So these are things that we really have to pay attention to. And finally, as we look at this, one other piece that I want to add to the table: in high poverty schools, most Black and brown students have access to the least experienced teachers in that space as well. So not only are they facing, you know, programs that may be new at their school, right? But then you have access to teachers who may not be certified in the particular area, or in a space where they're least experienced teachers, you know, that are instructing them, you know, as well. So when you kind of take all of these factors together, you know, this is what creates these barriers and inequities, you know, and it happens across the country as well. But this is why we have to be diligent in the work that we do to support these students as well.
Yeah. Good. That's amazing. Good.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Good point. And kind of a nice segue to our next set of questions is, we all know that the Charlotte schools are highly segregated by race and poverty. I mean, Charlotte is the home of some of the lowest performing schools and some of the highest performing schools. So as education leaders, and this is for anybody on the panel, as leaders in education in Charlotte, you know, I realize desegregation, we may not see that completely overturned in our generation, but can you tell me what is being done to level the playing field to make sure that all kids receive a quality education, no matter what school they attend?
If I can start, because having been raised in Charlotte, it's sad that the Swan versus Board of Education, I believe it was 1970, 69, 70, we find ourselves in Charlotte, which is linchpin for change at that time, with respect to desegregation or dealing with busing issues, what have you, finds itself at this point. That's sad. I think being able to, one, let data guide us and make some determinations of how we can assist students along the way is very important. I think sometimes we don't care that the data tells us some very troubling things, but the data helps us make some very informed decisions. And I think that we're seeing now, with some of the societal changes, some of the changes around what's happening throughout the country, the Black Lives Matter movement and other areas, that we see companies and groups now being very concerned about where we are with respect to being fair and having parity. So some of the challenges that we've had in the past are being mitigated by some efforts, but I don't know if those efforts are strong enough. We talk about college readiness programs such as any TRIO program or Upward Bound, whatever the case may be. We talk about AVID or communities and schools. These are drops in the proverbial bucket when these students don't know where their next meal is coming from, when they have insecurities, or when they don't necessarily understand how to navigate the simple things as far as being courteous to someone else, or if they had a bad experience at home where they're actually having to raise their siblings, and then they're having to switch to being a child from 8 to 5 or 8 to 3 or whatever the case may be. So I think the leveling of the playing field is going to take some very specific opportunities from the business community, the community at large, fraternities, sororities, religious organizations, working in concert to really move the needle beyond just an opportunity of the season we're in now, but being committed for the long term. And we see it happening at some levels, but unfortunately, I'm afraid that we're going to have a pulling back as we determine what's normal again and what's acceptable again, and then how that acceptability impacts our students going forward and impacts the community going forward.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to chime in? Things that are being done to level the playing field?
Surely, I think one thing I want to articulate to those who are listening and alongside our panelists is that the racial and income composition of our schools, and in many school districts which are utilizing, say, neighborhood schooling, is reflective of the racial and income composition of our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And so what you see is exactly those who are live within a particular geographic area and the school which they're assigned to. We have, I think, some top-notch, nationally recognized magnet programs in our district. And those magnet programs are doing exactly what we'd like them to do, be magnetic and drawing students from different backgrounds into those schools and using that as a diversity system. But I think part of what myself, our superintendent, Ernest Winston, and other leaders are tasked with doing says, no matter which school a student goes to, no matter its composition, its concentration of race or concentration of poverty, whatever it be, that we have to make sure that those schools will serve them. I want to go back to two things that Ann mentioned that she's seeing across the country. One is how we're assigning talent, our use of talent. Being able to recruit and place, develop, and retain highly effective teachers. Ronnie himself being in that bucket, trying to create conditions, whether it be at the local level or the state level, that allows Ronnie to pursue his passion as a teacher and be able to take care of his family, to progress professionally, and to be able to sustain that joy. People like James O'Neill, who we mentioned, his colleague at Piedmont IB, was someone who is a native North Carolinian, went to Pittsburgh. We got him to come back from Pittsburgh to serve here in Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. We need to attract talent from anywhere we can, be those principals or teachers. But we have to make sure we support teachers. I think during the last decade, our country has gone through a lot of stress in many ways, but one of those has been when we implemented the Common Core and then the North Carolina Standard Course of Study as we left the Common Core, which Ann was actively part of, making sure that we kept high standards in our state. And as we made that transition, we didn't always put our teachers and principals in the best position to meet those raised standards. So although the test scores became more rigorous and we saw some rates go down, we didn't always equip them. So what we're working to do, and we need to continue to do better and more of, is to make sure that we support teachers with the tools they need, the training they need, the resources they need, be that time or money, to be able to provide that high quality instructional diet for kids. But I worry, and this is something I did learn under Ann's leadership here in the district, is there are just not enough Ronnies, not enough James O'Neills to go into every classroom. And if we rely on being able to recruit 9,000 great teachers, the moment they step into our school district, we aren't going to be able to meet that need. So we need to be able to develop the people who care passionately about kids, care passionately about teaching, and give them the tools they need to continue to grow in their craft and grow in the profession.
Right. You know, another thing, John, I was doing research on this. As someone, we're not in education, but when we are parents and we look at it, when we have a low performing school and a high performing school, it just seems logical to us. Why doesn't the district leverage the resources? Why is it that one school won't have books and the other school has plenty of books? I mean, we have learned that even through our students in YBLA. So we're just trying to figure out, why is it like that? It could be a 20-mile radius between a low and a high performing school where they have the best teachers. Is there a way to leverage the best teachers that everybody would benefit from it, so the low don't continue to be low? What is the answer to that? Because it just seems logical on someone outside of education. Like, why do we still have this problem?
I think CMS is a unique case to answer that question because of how large the system is. So even thinking about your original question, apologize, the phone is ringing here. Even when asking about your original question, the Frank brought up some very good points, but the magnet program solves problems for some families and some groups that have obstacles, but what's good for one school or one child, with the magnet program, if another child's going to school without one, why is that program not good for them as well? And our magnet program is designed a lot of times where parents are trying to get their kids into that particular school, not necessarily that particular magnet program in terms of where it lines up. We do a lot of things in education that we know are not sound practices. And we know of a whole lot of sound practices that we simply do not do. Creating a cookie cutter curriculum for students that have completely different needs and completely different backgrounds and completely different cultural lenses is ridiculous. But we still have cookie cutter curriculums. We still have testing that is the same testing for all students. And as long as I've been in CMS, it has been a segregated school system. But even when you take a school that may be struggling and put a program in that school, that doesn't solve the situation for the school or those families, because you're not addressing the real needs of those families and of that community. And even looking within the urban setting of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, even if we were to do a good job of desegregating, it still goes back to the phrase that you used of providing a quality education. I could be in a rural community that has only, one elementary, one middle, one high school. Everybody in that community is desegregated. Everyone is going to school together. But if I don't have quality educators and a quality education, I mean, we're dealing with issues now where we're still opening up the newspaper and seeing things and finding out that schools are not teaching the Holocaust to children. We're finding out, the president of our United States called the 1619 project and the 1619 curriculum toxic and wants to replace it with a patriot education. And there are communities that agree with that, and based upon state legislatures in which that may happen. So there's, it's a tough subject. It's a tough subject.
Tammy, I will share that I do see districts across the country looking at different ways to budget to support schools. And one of those ways is something called weighted student staffing, where there's an opportunity to weight students of poverty more, which allows individual schools with high percentages of students of poverty to gain additional teaching positions, teacher assistants, student services personnel, social workers. And that is a budgeting process that has been used in CMS for a number of years. And so that is a way that I'm seeing districts across the country rethink budgets. So it's not just a matter of you have 600 students, you're going to get the same amount as a school that has 600 students of poverty. But instead, we're going to weight the students differently in that second school, which will allow a individual school to earn additional resources, whether that be dollars or positions, depending on how a state allocates funding to the local school district. So that's just one example at a national level, but it is also a local example as well.
Wow.
That's great. So Robert and Chance, you guys were talking about how what happens in high school kind of transitions into the college space. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that as we did our research, there was a lot of information about teacher bias. And I've seen that. I've experienced that. People's expectations, their level that they expect Black students to achieve at seems to be lower than what they expect white students to achieve at. So even at the college level, do you guys experience that, one? And then two, what is being done basically around the country, do you think, to improve teacher biases?
If I can jump in, because this is probably one of my most favorite questions that I saw listed. I've seen it, and I've seen it be as specific as assuming that because you have Black students and Black parents at a university, that we're not engaged, we don't read, we don't care about our students, that there's some sort of low performance expectation. And this was at HBCU, not my current HBCU, but another school that I worked at, where I had someone just flat out say, make it simple, have a lot of pictures, and engage through that process. And then when I presented data that says, okay, most of our students are not first generation, most mom and dads have some college education, that we should not make the assumption that because the history of HBCUs may say something specific about a demographic in the past, it may not be true now. But we have these old paradigms that folks are utilizing in order to make decisions. And some of it comes down to just being culturally lazy or insensitive, where you assume that what may have worked at wherever you may have experienced some opportunity to engage someone works in all settings. So I do think that part of the challenge when we change this has to do with how we, again, let data inform us about who we're serving. And I don't necessarily like using the term customers when it comes to students too often, because it can send the message that we can change grades on a whim by financial aid to anyone because they're a customer. But understanding that the same level of service academically, administratively, that someone would get at a top tier school, at a Princeton, at a Harvard, at a UNC Chapel Hill, or some of the other state universities in North Carolina, you get it everywhere you go. And sometimes the worst answer may not be no. It may be no with the caveat, let me help you understand how things work, and then maybe educate someone along the way. But I've seen it in the classroom. That's one of the reasons we started building Better Brothers at UNC Charlotte, because we had students informing us that they were not feeling comfortable in a space of being culturally, there was no cultural awareness. It was more or less a cookie cutter approach with the Black males. And because they looked well on a piece of paper, they should perform well in all circumstances. And the cultural aspect was not being considered.
Yes, and to add to that, how that plays out on the K through 12 level, particularly in high school, before they get to college, when you look at teacher bias, it could be from the viewpoint where the teacher thinks they're well-intentioned, but is actually hurting the student. For example, if you take a COVID situation like we're in now, a teacher may say, well, I know you don't have this at home. I know you don't have a hotspot. I know you just got your device. So I'm not going to give you any homework, or I'll be, easier on you. And then you may not have the same homework requirements. And then if you add up over time, over a student's K through 12 career, that they may face that particular type of teacher bias, then when it looks at their academic credential, then they're unprepared, because the rigor, and the expectation was not there based on what a teacher perceived what was going on at home. And so in the many trainings I do across the country for teachers and educational leaders, I mentioned to them, situations like this, and this is why students need homework, because they don't have, those types of things to catch them up. in those types of situations. So teacher bias from the viewpoint of that person when they're doing it at that particular time, they may think they're well-intentioned, but they actually could be hurting, Black students, in those ways, because then the student knows, well, I know I don't have to go up to the same level because the teacher feels sorry for me. And then they just kind of take hold to that persona. And then they may expect other teachers to do that for them. And then when they meet a teacher that holds them to a very high standard, then they could say things like, that teacher's being hard on me, as well. So that's kind of how it plays out subtly over time, with bias and daily practice, and then ultimately hurts the student academically as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We see that a lot in our program itself, because again, to participate in YBLA, you have to have a 3.0 grade point average. And it's a standard that we get challenged a lot on. And really we get challenged because a lot of people don't think our students can make 3.0s. And we tell people all the time, if you set the bar high, students will go there. If you set it low, they'll go there too. And what we see over time, as you mentioned, Chance, like if you don't challenge a student over time, when that student does get challenged, they're not used to it. They haven't flexed that muscle. So we're not doing them any favors by making it easy. You're just making life harder in the long run for these students. So thanks, Chance, for bringing it up. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, we're going to grab a question in the chat. One question that I saw, and Frank, I'm going to point this to you because you was talking about on the importance of recruiting really good teachers like Orani at Piedmont. But this teacher is asking, what is the district doing to retain teachers to go, or I should that, retain teachers to go to stay in the East and West Charlotte schools?
Yeah.
What is the district doing? To retain high quality teachers in East and West Charlotte schools.
That's Ross's question. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the first thing we're working to do is to make sure that each of those schools has a tremendous principal. One thing I've found is that often great teachers will follow great principals.
Oh.
And that the leadership and the culture of that organization, that's another thing we're trying to do, is recognize that trying to create focus on instructional culture. One thing that we did here in Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, we participated in a study. And this was several years ago, but it still actually impacts our regular practice. And the study was eventually turned into a report called The Irreplaceables. And 4 districts participated. We were one of those districts. We were given a pseudonym. We outed ourselves. And across that study of those 4 systems, what they found is that in any school, there are a set of teachers that are irreplaceable. They do so many things in the classroom, outside the classroom, and in high poverty schools, they're particularly hard to replace. In fact, you can have up to 11 applicants before you could actually get someone that good. And what we found is, when we did more research around those irreplaceables, is what we found is that teachers who are irreplaceable had never actually been told directly by their supervisor that they were irreplaceable, that they were good, or encourage them to stay. In fact, the study found across the 4 systems I participated is that low-performing teachers were actually being told that they were good or encouraged to stay at as high a rate or higher rate than high-quality teachers and high-performing teachers.
Wow.
And so what we're also working to do is to make sure that we're encouraging our leaders to have those conversations with their teachers to say, you're good. We need you here. Please stay. And just that little bit, the respondents in that study said, those are one of the things they want to be told, is just to be affirmed for the value that they're bringing. I don't think we're doing enough. I don't think we have all the things that we could do. So we're looking to learn from other systems, learn from other districts, other states, how we can retain more, as well as recruit more.
So it's always curious to me, and maybe Ann and Frank, you guys can jump back on this as well. I'm sure Ronnie will cheer for this, but it always seemed like in the business space, we rewarded our high performers. Like we gave them bonuses, they get paid more. So is that something, as an example, if you want you want the best teachers to go to the best school, if you pay them the highest amount of money, or the ones that you want to stay.
Lower schools.
Right, best teachers, lower
Yeah,
school.
lower schools.
That's right. You
Yeah.
pay them the most money.
Yeah.
Is that something that is considered in the school system? Like the ones you say can't be replaced, shouldn't they be paid the highest?
Yeah.
It is something that schools have been researching for years now. I'd say at least the past 10 to 15 years. I've been on committees at the local and state level to talk about pay performance. It's a very difficult, complex thing because teachers do so many things and wear so many hats. So, to look at it can also cause issues because you look at test scores and one teacher may have test scores, but then you're judging based upon the students they taught, whereas another teacher who is known to be a effective teacher with students that are struggling, and then they get the struggling students, but they can't move test scores and they get nothing, whereas somebody who gets the kids that are high flyers that are getting great test scores. And then, outside of just the teaching duties, the amount of things that we do. I've been here since the times where I used to get a stipend for mentoring other teachers, and I mentor 2-3 teachers a year. And, that has slowly been taken away. Master pay has been taken away. I think, from the teacher aspect, I mean, it just simply is, if you value teachers, you value education. If we say that we know, again, that goes back to the idea in education, what we know works, but we don't do those things in education. We know that a good teacher makes a ton of difference in a classroom, but what are we doing to show good teachers, that matters? We as a society, and I can't remember if it was Mandela, MLK, who made this quote, but where we put our money it shows what a society values. And if our society is spending more money on military and prisons than they are education, then we're not valuing the right thing as a society.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
John, I'll just add one thing. When you look at talent in schools, when you look at districts across the country, one thing we do have to realize is that, when you look at resource allocation or human resource allocation in this example, all teachers work for the district, right? Not for individual schools. So, the assignment and how that assignment plays out, is up to the purview, of that school district where those teachers, are placed. So, so it seems, pretty simple from the outside of, put those teachers, in the low performing schools, and it can happen, because they do work for the district. It's just a matter of school districts have to manage the pushback that comes along with that from all the different stakeholders. And the easiest way to manage that with the resources is really having, those conversations about what students get to go to what schools. And so, when the demographic of the attendance boundaries change, then the resource allocation and ultimately the talent of the teachers, will also change, as well. So I just want to put that out there because most times the public thinks teachers work for specific schools when they actually work for the district.
Great. So this leads me into the last question, and we got a couple of minutes here. So if you guys would be quick on the answer. So really, I mean, COVID really changed everything kind of in the space, opened up a bunch of people's eyes. So really the question is, do you think that COVID will start the new revolution in educational equity? And then where will our education system go in terms of access? And what are the differences in how we learn? So
I want to hear from all of y'all on that one. What's your take on this COVID pandemic? Would this be the start of something new that will go into more equity for all?
And would you start us off with that one?
Absolutely. I've spent a lot of time thinking with school district superintendents across the country about what about pre-COVID public education, what threads do we want to pull forward into a post-COVID public education? And by the same token, what are some things that we've learned in COVID and public education that we want to pull those threads forward? I'll give you an example. Out of school suspension. I would make the case that there shouldn't be a need to out of school suspend students in schools ever again, that we've learned in COVID about ways that we can provide instruction, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's remote. And we know that across our country, our African-American students are disproportionately represented in out-of-school suspension. So is a post-COVID public school system an opportunity to rethink policy and practice as it relates to student conduct and consequences. That's just one example. I think we now are clear that whereas 30 years ago, having a pencil and maybe a calculator was an essential school supply item, we're now in a place where I think having a device and the connectivity has to be the way forward. And that's not just a public school response, that's a community response in terms of public Wi-Fi and access to Wi-Fi that can work to support what a student needs to do from home, not having to go to the public library, not having to drive to the closest school where a school bus is parked so that they can have access. So I think our experience as a nation with COVID has provided an opportunity for us to not go back to some pre-COVID ways of doing business in public education, and also to pull forward some things that we've learned in the process of being in a remote teaching and learning environment.
Right.
Awesome. Chance, your thoughts?
Yes, it is definitely my hope that COVID does change it for a revolution, because pre-COVID, we saw many school districts across the country were not fully prepared for a pandemic and how to go virtual that quick. So now with budget allocations and the need to know that virtual is not going anywhere, this allows for greater collaboration with the corporate community and many others to make sure that the training that students receive and the equipment is there, as Frank mentioned, about hot spots and all of these other things that are now the new normal in education. That's my hope, that it is a revolution around that. So teachers are trained differently, principals and all stakeholders are trained differently to deliver educational content because of the current situation as well.
Okay.
Awesome. Frank.
Real quick.
I think it's going to take a tremendous amount of public will that we not go backwards as opposed to go forwards.
Yeah.
And that given the economic conditions of our country, there's going to be an opportunity for us to push money to different places. And school systems may have experienced a bit of a deficit over time. We're going to have to fight for what we believe and fight for those who have been historically underserved, and that these COVID conditions, I don't believe in and of themselves will lead to a revolution. But I think that which we've seen surfaced and magnified can make those of us who are committed to such a charge bring the revolution.
Awesome. Robert?
Thank you.
Yes, I would just offer that it's going to help us rethink how we deliver services to students. Summer bridge programs are very important to students, where they actually get the college immersion experience for the summer leading into their freshman year. I'm looking to see if we can go virtual with some of these opportunities, virtual learning, virtual field trips, virtual experiences, but students can still stay at home, be a part of their community, work as they prepare for their freshman year, get 6-7 hours worth of college credit, but get that bridge program where they have an established cohort. There's all kinds of ways we can take this opportunity now to let it pay it forward educationally and culturally for our students.
Awesome. And Ronnie?
How we learn is without a doubt forever changed. And it was a time that I actually thought that there may be a possibility in the future that we could be completely educationally online and distance learning. But I've actually learned that I think it's going to be impossible, because you just cannot replace in-person learning. But the great catch-22 that we're in with COVID is that, especially for minorities, they're definitely the ones suffering by the lack of in-person learning, because they're just going to get behind further. But they're also the most vulnerable if we were to bring them back into the schools, So it's a
Right.
great catch-22 with minorities.
Right.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right. So we're going to move into the last segment.
Yeah.
Thank you guys
Thank you,
for
Catalyst.
definitely being there for us. So we're going to move to the call to action really
Yeah.
quick.
Now, how to get these t-shirts. Okay. Our next call to action, and you will see on your slide, is a YBLA stand t-shirt, which is what John and I are wearing.
Get your very own.
All right. Yes. Okay. So what it is, if by purchasing this shirt, you are standing for change and supporting the racial equity. You're also supporting a YBLA Young Black Student, because we're using this to go in our YBLA Education Fund. So two good reasons why you should purchase a shirt. On the screen, you will see that the deadline is Sunday. So you have about a week and a half to order them, but we really would appreciate if you take advantage and even send it out to your friends.
Abona's going to drop the link in the chat. So
Yes.
Abona, go ahead and drop that link in the chat for us. So please go ahead, please go ahead and order those.
Yep.
Wonderful. We'll have an opportunity for you guys to wear those, but that'll be an awesome day. Please share the link with your network to help raise awareness about this initiative, but also help raise scholarship funds for our students. We talked again on the education panel.
Right.
Panel did a wonderful job talking about
Yes.
education, but scholarships and paying for school is also super important as well. So please go ahead and purchase those. We would love to have a day where all can wear them together.
That's
Which
right.
would be awesome. So thank you guys
Right.
again. Thank you
Yes.
panelists. Thank you DHG for supporting us. Thank you guys for hanging on a little longer there.
That's right.
Please feel free to join us on our next segment.
That's right. And it is going to be October the 22nd. It's
Yes.
a Tuesday. And we'll be talking about the health disparities among Blacks.
Awesome. So if you missed any one of our segments, you can go to our website. It's always on our website. We keep it there. So our website is www.youngblackleadership.org/community-conversations.
Yes.
So everyone have an amazing day.
Yeah.
In order
And that was October 20th. I'm sorry, guys.
October 20th?
I said the 22nd.
Tuesday, October 20th.
Tuesday, October
Tuesday,
20th.
October 20th.
Join us.
Order a bunch of t-shirts between now and then.
That's right.
You guys have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody.